So I'm just gonna get started. So for my ball animation, I want something for the ball to bounce on. I'm just having the ball fall from the sky. It's gonna hit the ground and it's gonna bounce back up. So I'm going to, excuse me. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna make like a rectangle and make it like green and put it down here. Up, why didn't it make it green? Okay, I guess I'll fill that in green. There we go. Okay, there's my rectangle. So that'll be my ground. And I'll draw a line across it just so we can see where that is. So I'm going to hit Y to get my brush tool. And I like the paintbrush tool because it's just a stroke. I'm going to increase the stroke size a little bit. I'm going to do like 6. And then I'm just going to draw a ground with the pen. So I'm going to go like this. I'm going to intersect my rectangle, and notice how it smoothed out all of those little kind of like wavy things I did. So these are some settings that you'll want to play with as you get started. So I have, for my paintbrush, I have the color and style, I have the stroke, this is the opacity, I want it 100% so it's completely opaque. I have the stroke size, which I have increased a little bit to make it more visible. There's a style and width and scale, all this stuff I can ignore for now. And then there's this thing called smoothing, and that's what's going to smooth out your stroke. So if I turn this all the way up, you can see like I can do a lot of stuff like that, and it's going to make these kind of like very geometric shapes. So this is like almost exactly a triangle. This is like a nice sine wave. So if you like that style, you can turn the smoothing up. If you don't like that style, you can turn the smoothing down. This is going to keep all of the kind of weird imperfections of my drawing. So I usually put the smoothing somewhere at like 10. So it kind of looks like my original pen movement, but it smooths it out a little bit. So it removes some of the extra data. So that makes the file size a little bit smaller. And, it just kind of is your visual preference as well, depending on what style you're going for. So now I can do a little line, and there's a few strokes in there. I actually want it to be a little more detail in there. Okay, that looks pretty good. So real quick, if I want to like do some edits to this, I can use my sub-selection tool, and I can select both of these thingies. And oh wait, which one do I want? Selection tool. If I select both of these, there we go. So I can like click on these different areas, and I can just delete this. So notice if I click on this area, even though these are two different things, it notices that there's a contour here, and then I can just delete that top section. So that's something you guys have maybe done with Illustrator before. That's not really the point of this, but I just wanted to show I do that a lot. If I'm just trying to create like a little ground or like a sky or something like that, I can just delete those fills if I want to. Okay, so that's my ground layer. So let's look at our layers for a second down here in the timeline. I have this layer 1, and my layers kind of separate my different drawings, so I can animate different parts of my composition, leave some stuff the same throughout the animation, and change other stuff as I go. So for layer 1, I'm going to double click on that, and I'm going to call this ground. And I don't really want this to change at all. I want it to stay the same. And so I'm going to click the lock button. That's going to prevent me from moving the ground by accident as I work on my animation. Okay, so now I can't draw anymore. If I hit Y and I try to draw, it tells me I can't do that. I don't want to unlock the layer. I want to create a new layer. So I'm just going to hit the new layer button, this plus button. And I'm going to call this one ball 1. I'm going to animate all of my balls on this one thing. So I'm going to call this ball 1. It says I can't use special characters, which is the space. So that's fine. It's going to change the name for me. That's okay. I'm going to say I don't want to see this again because I don't really care. And I'm going to hit OK. And I can see it called it ball_1. That's fine. Okay, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller again. And I'm going to draw my first frame. So the timeline is broken down into little frames. And so these frames represent each frame of our animation. And we'll talk about this a lot as we do more animating. If I use this little ball over here, I can increase or decrease the amount of frames that I see in the window. This kind of gets cut off because the resolution of the projector is small, but I can move this over. Actually, I can't. So I can move the properties window over. Okay, there we go. Now we can see the whole thing. So if I move this up, the frames are larger. If I move it down, the frames are smaller. I probably want to do like a 30 frame animation, so I'll do something like that, just so I can see all the frames. I'm going to be editing the frames down here as I go with the mouse, but while I'm drawing, I don't really want to be switching between the mouse and the pen a lot. And so this is where keyboard shortcuts are really, really useful. The main one that you're going to use all the time is just F7. F7 will just go to the next frame and create a blank keyframe, meaning that the drawing that I made will no longer be on the next frame, and I can make a new drawing, and then I can keep going. This is basically how you do frame-by-frame animation. So I can go up here, I can draw my first ball, which will just look like this, and then I can hit F7, and you can see it down there. This ball disappeared, but it's still there. My new frame is blank, meaning that it's a blank canvas that I can start a new drawing on. So I can draw the ball. One issue is I don't remember where my first ball was. This is where our favorite tool, the onion skin, comes in. I click on the onion skin, and you can see the previous frames. And so they're going to look kind of blue. You can change that color if you want to, but it gives you a reference for where your previous drawing was. So with the ball drawing, what we want to do, actually I forgot to go over this because it's later. We'll talk about this in a second. But what we want to do is squash and stretch. That's one of our 12 principles. So last week we talked a little bit about the 12 principles that was created by the Disney animators like 100 years ago for how to make good animations. We're going to go over those principles throughout the semester. The one we're going to talk about today is squash and stretch. This is the idea that when something is in motion, the way that we can show that motion is by stretching it out. And then when it hits something or it changes directions, we can overemphasize, we can use squash to really emphasize that it's hitting something and changing directions. So that's what we're going to work on today. We're going to ignore stuff like timing for now. We're going to go over that next week. It's going to look not very realistic, but we're just going to focus on that one principle and really exaggerate that. So as my ball is falling, gravity is pulling the ball down, and so gravity is going to stretch the ball out. So my second frame, I don't want to do like too much more, but I'm just going to draw another ball down here, and it's moving a little bit farther down. It's not really stretching out quite yet because it's just getting started. And so I have my second frame, and then I just hit F7. Another thing that is important with frame-by-frame animation is how many frames you have in between. Sometimes this is referred to as the ones and twos, which is down here. So you might say working on ones or twos or threes. Actually, when I'm making my own animations, I usually do it on like 4 or 5 or 6. So that's how many frames there are between each new drawing. And so you can see if there's only one frame between each new drawing, you get a lot of variation in the animation. There's much smoother motion. On twos, that means there's 2 frames for each drawing. The animation is a little more choppy, but you don't have to draw as much. It lasts longer. And then threes, you see it's even more choppy. You get sort of a different quality. So depending on what the quality or the effect you want to go for, you'll have a certain number of frames in between your drawings. I'm just going to go with ones for now because we're just getting started. So I'm going to draw my next ball. I'm going to stretch it out just a little bit, and I'm going to move it down a little bit more because it's getting a little bit faster. That was a little bit more than I wanted to do. Let's try it again. Okay, so now we're stretching out a little bit. We're going to hit F7. Now I'm just going to kind of keep going since we have the basic idea. So I'm stretching the ball out as gravity is pulling the ball towards the ground. I don't really care that much about the ball looking exactly right for now. Okay, so now we're kind of stretched. We're about to hit the ground. So now we're going to go into our squash. So now the ball is hitting the ground and it's going to squash down before it bounces back up. Okay, so I'm going to, if I really want to exaggerate this, I could just like make the ball like, whoops, splat like this. Or you could have a couple frames in between. So I'm going to really splat the ball out like that. And obviously the more frames you do, the longer animation you have, the more, the more you can play with that. I might even like make the ball kind of like bend almost a little bit. Like there's like a little bump there. And then we'll start to go back up, so the ball will start to get its shape back. Keep going. So I'm just hitting F7 each time and just making a new drawing. And so now we got the ball off the ground. And again, we start to stretch because the force of the ground, the ball hits the ground and gravity is pulling it down. So there's all this force coming towards the ground. When it hits, it splats, and then all that force gets pushed in the opposite direction. So we have all this velocity going back up, but then as we're going up, oops, forgot to hit F7. As we're going up, gravity is going to start to act on the ball again. And so gravity is going to start to pull the ball back down. I probably should bring a reference for my original ball over here, but I'm not going to do that quite yet. I'm going to make this one a little bit more round. And okay, so let's take a look at that. So now if I want to play back the animation, however many frames I have here is what I'm going to see. I'm going to hit Control 2 to fit the animation, and then I'm going to hit the play button. It's actually not so bad. So if you hit Enter, it'll do the same thing. I probably have more frames than I need, but you can see if I want to loop the animation, I just click this loop button. But then I have to tell it how far to loop, so I'm going to drag that blue line back. That's actually not so bad. It only jumps over a little bit when it loops around. So, of course, you can go back and scrub through your frames, and you can edit any individual frame where the drawing might not be completely right. You can also play with the onion skin. So if I drag the onion skin back that way, you can see all those frames. If I go over here and I drag the onion skin forward, you can see the frames coming later. That's not super useful for frame-by-frame animation. When you do like rigging and stuff, you'll probably want to use that more. I usually just do like 1 or 2 because I don't like seeing a ton of stuff on the canvas. But 1 or 2 is pretty good. Okay, so that's basically it. That's our frame-by-frame animation. That's what we're going to work on at the beginning of class. I'm going to save this. I'm going to hit Control S and save this. If you want to see what the animation is going to look like when you actually export the file, I think you hit Control Enter, and it makes a little movie that you can watch. So that's what it's going to look like when I export it. And I can just X out of there. And let me see. I think that's it for now. Yeah, so I'm going to stop here. We're going to talk about tweening in the second half of class, but for now, you guys can just work on creating your frame-by-frame ball animation.